The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong. If we all live by an eye for an eye, the whole world will be blind. The only way out is forgiveness. We ought to be like the father of the prodigal son every day of our lives. And why should we be like the father of the prodigal son? It is because, first, we are sinners and we have experienced forgiveness. I went through a terrible situation, but I found myself happy today because I was able to forgive. Peace be to you. Today, I wish to talk about forgiveness. Mahatma Gandhi, the Indian leader, says, "The weak can never forgive. Forgiveness is the attribute of the strong." Equally, the very man says, if we all live by an eye for an eye, the whole world will be blind. The only way out is forgiveness. And this is very true because daily we experience people and circumstances and situations that really piss us off. We find ourselves angered. We find ourselves in situations of depression and all sorts of situations. And the only way out most often is forgiveness. Because we live in society with people and we must live with these people in the community. And these people daily must hurt us. They must cause us pain. They must make us feel bad. And most often, if we do not get to forgive these people, we find ourselves dejected, worried. We find ourselves depressed. We find ourselves with stress and why not stroke and death and many other consequences that do come to us when we refuse to forgive one another. One of the experiences I had, or one of the things I saw that made me to know that forgiveness is not impossible, or forgiveness is not difficult to give once I decide to forgive, is when I went into a hospital and there I met this man who sat on a wheelchair. He was smiling. And when I walked towards him, I realized he had one leg. And I began to talk to him. He held my hand and told me, "My son, let me tell you something. I went through a terrible situation, but I found myself happy today because I was able to forgive." And what was his story? He had an infection on his leg. He went to meet the doctor and he was supposed to have his leg amputated. And on the day the leg was supposed to be amputated, he went to the theater. He was ready for it. After the children had struggled to convince him to accept the amputation of the leg, because he had formally denied that he did not want his leg to be amputated, because he did not realize how he was going to live the rest of his life just with one leg. But when they went into the theater room, the doctor made a mistake. Instead of cutting off the leg that had a problem, he cut off the leg that was okay. Worst case scenario, the leg which was amputated was not properly taken care of and got infected. And so this man sat at the hospital because he wanted treatment for his leg which had been amputated and which was not the leg that had a problem. And now he was still thinking, what am I going to do? Am I going to have the other leg amputated so that the disease does not spread to the rest of my body? But he was smiling. When I saw him, I felt forgiveness. It's possible. And since then, I've always looked at life differently. I've always looked at things differently. C.S. Lewis tells us that to be a Christian means to forgive the inexcusable, because God himself has forgiven the inexcusable in us. And daily, we find ourselves before God begging for mercy, asking for forgiveness, because as St. Paul says, we all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and none of us should actually be experiencing the joy, the peace, and the happiness that we experience daily, because we daily are going against God, we are breaking communion with God, but God still daily struggles to recapture us, to reconcile us to himself. bring us back to himself in conversion. And it's all by his grace. It's all because of his love. And if God reconciles us with himself, if he forgives us, who are we not to forgive our brothers and sisters? In fact, Jesus says, if you do not forgive your brother and sister his transgressions against you, your heavenly Father will not forgive your transgressions against him. Which means God makes forgiveness of us dependent on our ability and our readiness to forgive our brothers and sisters. When one reads through the literature of the divine mercy, there are certain things that come out clearly. They call them the ABC of mercy, which is A, ask for his mercy, ask for God's mercy. We all have sinned, we all need God's mercy. And so we need to constantly ask God for his mercy, ask God for his forgiveness, ask God that he may shower his love on us when we have strayed from his path, as we do most often. Secondly, is be merciful. Be merciful means we ourselves, when we have asked God and received mercy from him, we must be merciful towards others. We must share that mercy with others. We must develop a forgiving spirit, being able to show mercy to all we encounter. And thirdly, completely trust in Jesus. We may try to be merciful, but we cannot succeed on our own if we do not realize we are being merciful for a purpose, because of a reason, that we have there's a raison d'etre for our forgiveness or for our being merciful towards others, and that is Jesus himself. The question is, why should we be merciful or forgive one another? After the experience of the prodigal son, who came back to his father asking for mercy, and he was given the mercy which he desired from his father, we see clearly God is ever ready to forgive any one of us who comes to him asking for mercy, asking for pardon. When the son had taken the property that was to come to him after the death of his father and walked away from the father, he went to a distant land, spent it with prostitutes, as we are told. He did not see his father receiving him after he had tried to feed the pigs. But God, being as merciful as he always is, when he went down on his knees and prayed and said, I shall arise from this place and I'll go back to my father and I'll tell him, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I no longer deserve to be called your son. Take me as one of your hired servants. The father was ready to embrace him and to receive him back, to reconcile him with himself, which tells us that we ought to be like the father of the prodigal son every day of our lives. And why should we be like the father of the prodigal son? It is because, first, we are sinners and we have experienced forgiveness. We all are sinners. We have fallen short of the glory of God. But because God continues to forgive us, because God continues to show us mercy, we must be able to show mercy to all who wrong us, those who cause us pain. We can think of the woman caught in adultery. When this woman was at that point of being stoned by the elders, when she met Jesus, light and darkness coming into contact, good and evil coming into contact, Jesus looked at her and asked her, has no one stoned you? She said, no one, sir. And Jesus said, neither do I condemn you. Go and sin no more. To go and sin no more means when we go, we must be able to show mercy to others, because refusing to forgive one another is refusing to be merciful as God has been merciful to us. It's about deciding to continue to live in sin, because unforgiveness itself is sinful. Secondly, we have received that which we do not deserve, and that is forgiveness. We receive forgiveness from God, and we do not really deserve to receive forgiveness from God, because through our sin against God, God could destroy us. If the God of the Old Testament, for example, will strike us with thunder, he will make us disappear. But God loves us to a point that he wants to have us with him always and all the days of our lives. And so we have received forgiveness from God, which we do not really deserve. And so we must be able, since we are not deserving of the forgiveness of God, to give that forgiveness to others. When the apostle asked Jesus, how many times must I forgive? 7 times? Jesus said, no, not 7, but 77 times 7, which implies we must forgive unendingly, because continuously people are going to harm us, people are going to hurt us, but we must continue to strive to forgive, because even though we may feel the pain of the hurt, of the harm from others, we ourselves daily cause harm and pain to others, and God continuously forgives us, so we must continue to forgive others who cause us pain or who harm us. And again, forgiveness annihilates or destroys the chaos in the world. When we look at the world today, we see all the chaos, we see the wars, we see the quarrels, and all that is happening in the world today is a projection of what is in man himself. There is a lot of anger and tension and divisiveness in the human heart, and that makes itself manifest in the physical through the wars, the quarrels, the battles that we see daily in the world. And so when we learn to forgive, the chaos in the world ceases. When we learn to forgive, the tension and the warring, the competition that is so negative in the world disappears. And again, I like this illustration about forgiveness, which is when a woman gets up in the morning in the house, looks at the child, loves the child, and lets the child walk away with a blessing from the house, that child goes out with a blessing, with happiness, with joy and peace. Every other person the child meets, the child brings that blessing, that child brings that peace and that love to all those that he gets to meet. If it's a school child, that child, all the children who are going to meet that child in school, meet that child with a beaming, smiling, joyful and peaceful face. But if that child were to leave the house in anger, maybe crying, maybe with hatred in his or her heart, that child brings that hatred, that anger to every other person. And that is how the hatred or the anger spreads. And so many people are affected by it. That is how we are. That is who we are. What we give out is what we ourselves receive. And so when I approach somebody with a smile, I'm able to get a smile in return. And so when I give out forgiveness, I receive forgiveness. When I give out peace, I receive peace. And the best way to kill the enmity in the world today is to be peaceful and to show mercy, to show love, and to forgive. Because once I do not forgive, every other person becomes an enemy to me. I become suspicious of every other person who is around me. But once I begin to forgive, I come to understand people are struggling, they make their mistakes, but they want to grow out of their mistakes. There is much we can continue to talk about forgiveness and the reasons for which we can forgive, but these are enough and should help us to understand we must live by forgiveness, we must forgive one another, and it is when we live forgiving one another that we realize we free ourselves from the prison that could be our own heart, because forgiveness chains us, it binds us, it imprisons us, and when we liberate ourselves through forgiveness, we become happy, joyful people who can be able to worship God in truth and in spirit, because we cannot come before God with an unforgiving spirit expecting Him to grant happiness, grant forgiveness to us who deserve and who ask for that mercy always from Him. God bless you. Thank you very much.